Welcome and thanks for joining me today. I'd like to share with you an extraordinary story of God's grace. It was back in 1991 that my wife and I decided that it was time to build a house. And so, how to build a house debt-free to the glory of God with zero credit. That's right, we had no credit. I didn't even have a credit card at the time. And $30,000. So right off, you could see that this is not only extraordinary, this might be a little unusual. And yet, this is what God did. And the verse that God really impressed upon me during that time was the psalmist when he said, "Unless the Lord build the house, they that labor in vain that build it." And it was during those days, and really frankly to this day, we really believed in being debt-free in everything that we did, including a mortgage. So I never, not that I was even in a position to get a mortgage, because we weren't. We kind of lived paycheck to paycheck. But I truly felt convicted. In fact, at the time, I used to do seminars on financial freedom. And I didn't even own my own house, but I believed that God could supernaturally provide, and that if people would trust the Lord, that they would be able to build their own house debt-free. So then the time came for, I guess, me to put up or shut up. And as I said, in 1991, my wife and I, we had 5 children at the time. We had frugally lived. Didn't take a lot of vacations, went to a lot of yard sales, really saved money as best we could. And as I was kind of going through the savings in the checking account, I realized one day we had saved $40,000. That was a fortune for us. And it was right about that time, actually, which caused me to look as far as what our savings was, that my in-laws, my wife's parents, had gifted us an inheritance of $10,000. So we had $50,000. I mean, we felt like we were millionaires. And so we began to pray about the possibility of owning our own home for the very first time. We've been renting now for 15 years of marriage. We had moved 6 times, living in 3 different states. Actually started with Florida, then Pennsylvania, then Virginia, and then back to Florida. And as I said, our family had grown to 5 children. We eventually had 7. We've had 8 children altogether, but one of our children is with the Lord, and we look forward to seeing Stephanie Ann one day. But here we were, 7 of us, at that time, back in 1991, living in a very small 3-bedroom house, and obviously needing more room. So we began to look to see what was available. Now we live in a very nice community, Vero Beach, Florida, and frankly, Vero Beach, Florida is kind of an expensive community. It's not like every other community, even here in Florida. And so, as we began to look for houses, we quickly realized that there was nothing within our price range that we could purchase for cash. In fact, homes that were 25, 30 years old, that were still very small, and weren't necessarily in the best of condition, were going for like $65,000. And so I wanted to pay cash, and so we were out of the price range of the market. And as we continued to pray, I was encouraged to talk to somebody, actually the gentleman that I was using some material on financial freedom, and he was a very wealthy real estate broker out of Texas, and I called him up, and he encouraged me to talk to a fellow that he knew, another homeschooling family in Alabama. We were homeschooling at the time of our children, and he encouraged me to talk to this guy who was building his own house. Well, I did. I reached out to the gentleman, and frankly, to be totally honest with you, I thought the guy was crazy. he was going around to farms and dismantling barns and different dwellings and collecting the lumber and the supplies, and over a period of 10 years he was going to build his house. Well, that wasn't even practical for us. There was no way that I could do that, certainly not in a upscale community like Vero Beach. There's building codes and so forth, and we wouldn't be able to do that. And so I kind of got discouraged about the whole thing, and yet felt still impressed that the Lord wanted us to build debt-free. Well, before we could do anything, we needed a piece of property. And so I was actually in between pastoring churches at that time. As I said, I was teaching these financial seminars. And so I had started my own company. I was self-employed. And so we began looking for land. And while I worked all day, my wife began to investigate, calling the courthouse and looking into properties. And for about 6 months, we looked for property. And we wanted at least a ½ acre. It was just something that was on our hearts. We didn't want to be crowded when we finally did build. And so everything in Vero Beach for ½ acre, was as much as $75,000 just for the land. And that didn't include clearing the property or fill dirt, which could have been easily another $10,000 of expense. And so I'll never forget, after 6 months, I remember one day we took a ride out west of town, and we were just kind of looking in undeveloped areas, and just nothing seemed to be working. And I remember taking this turn down a road and began to drive, and it quickly turned into a grove. And it wasn't paved, and it was very bumpy. And I remember my wife said, "Honey, this is a grove, you might as well turn around." And I was kind of upset. I said, "No, I'm not turning around. I'm going to take this thing wherever it goes." And so I kept driving, and I was going north. And eventually, after about, 5 to 7 miles, we came to a paved road which went east. I had no idea where we were. But I knew that if I just drove east, being in Vero Beach, eventually I'd hit the ocean, so I couldn't get lost. So I began, as it turned out, that was 69th Street. And so I passed 66th, and then I passed 58th. And of all the searching for property that my wife had done, she had never been up in this section of our county. It's known as Winter Beach. And so as I turned down 51st Avenue, there was only at that time maybe about 3 houses on the road. And we both looked at each other and was like, wow, this is really nice. This would be perfect. It looked like they were ½ acre lots. And there's a for sale sign. And so I said, this must be God's provision. And it actually had the price right on the sign, $25,000 for a ½ acre lot. So we pulled across the street to one of the only houses on the street. My wife got out, ran up to the door, asked the person if they knew who owned the property. They said, yes, in fact, it's our daughter. She's selling. And I was all set and ready to purchase it, $25,000 ½ acre lot. Well, my wife said, no, I don't like that side of the road. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. What do you mean you don't like that side of the road? It's for sale. We've been looking for 6 months. No, drive down here to this house. And so I did. I pulled down there, and she ran out, knocked on the door. She said, I like that piece of property right there. It turns out that the neighbor knew who owned the property, gave us a telephone number and a name, and I was given instructions by my wife to call these people and see if they would be willing to sell the property. And I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. I don't wanna do that. It's completely out of my comfort zone. So sure enough, I made the phone call, and I will never forget what God did. This lady answered on the other side, and I kind of sheepishly said, ma'am, my wife and I have been looking for property. We happened to come down your street. My wife really likes your piece of property. We know it's not necessarily on the market, but we're just wondering if you might be interested in selling it. And I thought she was going to say you're crazy and hang up on me. And instead, she shocked me. She said, I can't believe you're calling me. She said, I'm actually sitting right now at my dining room table with my estate planner, my attorney. My husband died this past year. We live in New Jersey. It was his dream to move to Florida. She said, I have no desire to move to Florida. I'd be happy to sell you the property. How much would you like to buy it for? I said, well, ma'am, I said, she says, do you know what it's worth? And I said, well, technically, no. I said, I can tell you what it's appraised at as far as the property appraisal for taxes, because my wife knows all that stuff. I said, it's appraised at $18,500. But I said, honestly, what I would suggest to you is you talk with your attorney and get back with me on a selling price as to what you'd be willing to sell the property for. She said, that's an excellent idea. She said, I'll get back with you. So sure enough, she called. Actually, she sent me a proposal in the mail. And it came back. She was asking $25,000, which was the going price there in that neighborhood. And so, we had $50,000. That's half of what we had. And so I decided to call my dad, which was a very wise thing for me to do. And my dad said, offer them $18,000. And I said, Dad, I don't want to go so low that I offend them. He said, no, that's what you do. He said, you offer them 18 and then you're going to go back and forth and probably meet somewhere in the middle. I said, you're sure? He said, yeah. I said, okay. So I filled out the paperwork and I sent it back to her for $18,000. Well, a couple weeks went by and I didn't hear anything. So then I assumed, I lowballed her. She got offended. She's not going to respond to me. But, before I just kind of discard this, I really should probably at least call her. And so I did. I called her once again and I said, ma'am, I'm not sure if you got my proposal. She said, oh, yes, I did. She said, did you get my response? And I said, no, ma'am. She said, well, I had my attorney respond to you. She said, well, anyway, she said, I accepted your offer. And I was like a little stunned. I didn't what do you mean you accepted my offer? I only offered you $18,000. And after a long silence, she said, well, aren't you excited? Aren't you grateful? Don't you want to say thank you? And I said, oh, yes, thank you, ma'am, thank you. So God provided it for $18,000. And that was the first thing of any substantial piece of property or anything that we'd ever owned. And so here I was the next week going up there with a lawnmower. We obviously had to get a grading company and remove some trees and palmetto bushes. But God miraculously provided that piece of property for us. And then over the course of the next year, that was in 1991, I approached a friend of mine at church that worked at a trust company, and I know he had built his house, and I know he had helped build the pastor's house. And I approached Dan and I said, Dan, would you be willing to help me to do some blueprints? Oh, sure. So he said, let's meet one night and what kind of house do you want? I said, well, I have no idea. He says, well, begin to look at some magazines and we'll put it down. So we sat at the dining room table and we began to design a house just under 3,000 square feet. So it wasn't a small house. And after we got the blueprints all finished, he said, well, I can do the trusses for you. And I'll tell you what, I'll help you dig your footers and put in the steel, and we can call for the concrete. So Dan began to help me. I went down to the building department. I was the general contractor. I pulled all the permits, and we began building my house. And then when it came time to put up the walls, I had some friends over in Plant City, Florida, a pastor friend, and he brought about 8 guys with him. We put up all the walls and we put all the trusses up in one day without a crane. And it had a 612 pitch roof. And so over the course of the next months, every Saturday, a small group of guys would come out and help Dan and I. We would work every day. We took off every Sunday. And we began to build this house debt-free to the glory of God. Now, I had no credit. Now, in order to get lumber and building supplies delivered, they wanted credit. Well, it turned out, they found out I had no credit, but the guy said, well, look, we'll give you a 5% discount if you pay your bill every 30 days on all the building materials. I said, consider it done. So not only would they deliver everything that we ordered, me having no credit, but because I paid in cash every 30 days, they gave me a 5% discount. So imagine that. I had never owned a credit card. I had zero credit. But I had a faithful wife who would provide lunch for us every day while she homeschooled the kids. And we got the land cleared for $600. We had 100 loads of fill dirt brought in. We dug the footers, laid the steel, had the concrete slab poured, put up the walls, put up the trusses, continued working on it. And at the end of 1991, we could have moved in 91, but we decided to wait to January of 92 to save a full year of property taxes. And when we moved in on January 10th, 1992, we moved into a beautiful house. We'd never had it appraised at the time, but easily on a half-acre lot, easily it was worth $150,000 or more. It's probably currently worth $400,000 plus. And we built that with just $32,000 because we did all the labor, we subbed out a little bit, but it was a miraculous thing. During the time of building the house, my father-in-law sold an old rusty three-wheel bike. It was an old, what do you call those famous motorcycles, the Harley Davidson. He had a police Harley Davidson that was rusting in his barn on the farm there in Virginia, and somebody out of Newark or they lived in Suffolk. Somebody from the east came, heard he had the bike, and he sold it to them for $3,000, and he sent me the check for $3,000. God just miraculously provided the money that we needed to build that house debt-free to the glory of God. So I know that not everybody's going to do that, but I just want to give praise to the Lord. And if you will trust the Lord, unless the Lord build the house, they that labor in vain. Understanding our identity in Christ allows us to participate with God in things that aren't possible, but allows us to experience the miraculous. By the way, we're still living in that home. It's 2020. And all these years, since 2000, I've been in this ministry, counseling, and now doing Life as God Intended, and primarily been able to do so because God supernaturally provided for that house so we could live on a reduced income and pour into other people's lives. So I hope that this extraordinary story is an encouragement to you today. Whatever God is doing in your life, believe Him, trust Him, and walk by faith. We hope you were encouraged and blessed by this video. We would love to have your feedback and interact with you. If you have a testimony that relates to today's discussion, please share it below in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that each time we upload a video that you'll be notified. Be sure to check out our blog on our website, which is in the description below. And until next time, may you experience life as God intended.